I'm Scott Harkey, and welcome to Season 5 of Endava's Payment Talks, where we're going to unpack some key insights from our new Global Payments Report, Powering Growth in the Global Payments Race. You can check out the full report now. We'll drop the link down in the episode's page. Joining me today is Gary Conroy, CEO of TransferMate. Gary, welcome.
Thanks very much, Scott. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So TransferMate, global B2B payments platform. I know you work across a bunch of different markets and verticals, but we're going to really talk today about kind of the ecosystem and some of the synergies across the ecosystem, given the scale of the business and what all you guys are doing. So really want to take some time today to dive into what does it take for fintechs, banks, and enterprises to really work together, and what are some of the challenges that get created in doing so. So, Gary, really excited to have your perspective today. Why don't we start out by giving a little bit of an intro of yourself and of TransferMate?
Sure. So I've been in banking and payments and fintech since, well, forever, pretty much. So I'm with TransferMate 8 years. And so we're, as you say, a B2B payments company. So we move money in account to account rails. So if you think, in the US, you're going to make an ACH, a Fedwire, an RTP, or if it's cross-border, you can make a Swift international wire. And we have access to those local rails, so the ACH and instant equivalents. So like in Europe, it's SEPA credit transfer, SEPA instant, as well as being able to issue virtual accounts and hold currencies. So we can hold over 30 currencies and we can pay out in over 140. And we do that locally. So basically trying to make the world a smaller place and embed into B2B platforms. So via our technology stack, software platforms and indeed other FIs are able to access our payments infrastructure. So I've done kind of a little bit of anything and everything with TransferMate. So I started 8 years ago as Chief Commercial Officer. And then, having sold to Wells Fargo, Coupa, Concur, then really diving into the product side of the house and helping to build out, in particular, our tech stack and new product offerings. And and then more recently, as of April in 25, I'm the Chief Executive Officer of TransferMate. And before that, we're still in payments, but totally different type of payments. So before the 8 years in TransferMate, I was 12 years in a payment gateway. So that was more card acceptance. So Stripe type company, except it was the gateway. So we didn't sell. We were acquire agnostic, we called it. So hooked in to all of the acquirers in Ireland and the UK, and ended up doing a pretty successful migration of what at the time was HSBC Merchant Services. We're basically exiting out of the joint venture with Global Payments. Global Payments were going to acquire that business 100%. As part of that, they had to move everybody off the HSBC infrastructure. And we managed that project. I was the number two in Relex in that company, but we managed it so well, they ended up buying the company, right? So we sold
Not a
out to
bad
Global.
outcome.
Not a bad outcome. And to be fair, it wasn't just that migration. We were doing new business for them as well. So in 2015, Global Payments bought the company, and then I stepped up to MD and led the integration over 2 years. So Relex became the main e-com platform for global payments across the globe. So rolled out across the States, Canada, and Spain. And then as part of that integration, basically it was make Relex payments disappear into the global payments brand, and then as part of that, make myself disappear, and all of the direct reports and the management team reported up elsewhere into global payments, and I moved to TransferMate. Before that, banking. So I was implementing core retail banking systems across Africa and India, and so that was with a company. And I get to show my age, Scott, when I go. There was Kindle banking systems, and then Mises, and then D&H, now part of Finastra. And before that, in Goldman Sachs as part of their fast track program in Europe, rotating all around their IT and operations. So, from that you get that A, I'm very old, and B, I've done a lot of different things in banking and payments.
If we steer back, one of the things we saw on the payments report was really the emphasis on collaboration. And yeah, this particular kind of conversation is really centered around the idea of the ecosystem and kind of how that's evolving. What do you think is driving this increased need for collaboration or desire to collaborate amongst entities? Is there something systemic that's causing it? Is it just expansion of the market? What do you think?
Yeah, I think, look, there's so much complexity, in the market in general that, you know, you can only bring what you bring to the party, and you need other partners to help plug into the other bits of the solution, right? Um, so really, there's lots of elements to an ecosystem, but I think, where you've got really, regulators, banks, and fintechs are probably going to be the main actors that have to operate within that ecosystem. So, you know, the typical, role of the fintech, I think, has remained what it is. They can only do so much. A fintech can only do so much in making money movement more efficient, right? Um, TransferMate work in account to account and B2B payments. So are we really going to be able to influence how, an instant rail works? What influence do we have over that? I think you can certainly contribute and where there's consultation. So, for example, if you go back to February and March 2022, we would have seen that some of those local rails would have raised the transaction limit for their transactions. So faster payments in the UK went from 250,000 to 1 million. And all of a sudden now, that rail can start to be used for some high value B2B transactions, whereas previously would have been considered consumer led. And then a month after that, ACH same day did the same, went from 250,000 to 1 million. So how much influence do I really think TransferMate had over that decision, or fintechs? Probably limited. It's more, the direct integrators into those core payment schemes and the regulators working on that. The role of the fintech, what we can do, is to just be super focused on that customer experience, right? So, what TransferMate does is we embed our payments in B2B user platforms. So, if you're making a supplier payment, if you're making a payroll payment, if you're making a third level tuition payment, or if you're collecting, ecom funds, we can embed ourselves into that. And like, what does that mean? Like, kind of embedded payments. So I came from the card world before TransferMate, and really that was a total shift in terms of user experience. When we started out in Relax Payments, and the company would have started around the year 2000, and say, hey, we're gonna go sell, an internet gateway for internet payments. And actually, when we went to market, we were like, well, there wasn't so many internet payments that were happening. So you ended up selling to a lot of call centers and card not present. But gradually, you
Right.
saw that really come on. And then 2005, mobile phones. And really, that was, I think, that was lighting the touch to really accelerate, those card not present and internet payments. But what you had was, as a consumer, you know, I'm booking an Airbnb. Uh, you know, just imagine, as a B2B user, you kind of have to have this experience. Let's say you want to book a room, then, if you've got to go and initiate a payment, well, I swivel chair onto my, online banking system, and then swivel chair onto my ERP, check that, the payment's actually been received, and only then the transaction can go through. As a consumer, we go and book the room, and my payment details are embedded within the wallet and the application, and the payment gets processed. But the B2B experience for a lot of people is they have that swivel chair between those. So Transfer are trying to do is bring that consumer experience to B2B platforms. And so that's the challenge that we're, working on. The vast majority, in particular, you know, cross-border payments are, going to be 98, 99% B2B, and they're hundreds of trillions. So our focus is always on how can we make the user experience as easy and as frictionless as possible. And then we've got over 100 licenses, but we're not a direct member of all of those schemes. So who do we utilize for access to be able to issue local accounts or to be able to execute local payments? We work with the banks. And so they are a supplier to us in that scenario where we're selling to B2B platforms. But actually, it's kind of a reciprocal partnership. And this is, I think, where do you think it's going? There's got to be that bit of give and take. And a lot of the banks will operate in one territory. So Wells Fargo, for example, predominantly a US bank. But actually, by plugging in TransferMate as part of their international treasury solutions, what that means is if you're a customer of Wells Fargo and I'm billing Gary in Ireland, instead of Gary in Ireland having to go and make a Swift and international wire from my bank and getting charged for that, and then the Wells Fargo customer receiving an international wire and getting lifting fees for that, can use TransferMate so that they can present these invoices to their customers and use TransferMate's infrastructure to collect locally. So there's no fees for their customers. And there's no fees for receiving. The amount is 100% reconciled, and all that information is fed back into Wells Fargo, within their account information system. So their customers get one unified experience. So if I'm Wells Fargo there, I'm thinking, oh, actually, TransferMate's network means that I don't have to go and set up, entities and branches and infrastructure in all these territories. We can use TransferMate to expand the amount of countries that we can pay to and collect in. So it's it's a reciprocal partnership where we bring the technology. We're also very focused on cross-border. So where you have banks that are just focused in one territory, we're able to effectively allow them to expand their addressable market without having to go and get licenses in all those territories.
Yeah, so I think the things I picked out of that were one clearly expansion of capabilities, right? In that as an ecosystem, different layers in the stack, if you will, or different partners can bring different capabilities that when put together creates a better overall customer experience or extends out the functionality of the product or the service. One of the interesting dynamics of that is in the difference between, I'll genericize here, but say between a fintech and a financial institution is kind of the extreme example in terms of culture, in terms of risk tolerance, in terms of how they're run. What have you seen as some of the biggest differences and kind of navigating that from really a cultural perspective? Is it hard working with banks as a fintech? Is it hard working with other fintechs? Like, how do you think about that dynamic and how you make all this work as you're working kind of on both ends of that spectrum?
Yeah, look, nothing is easy. That's why they call it work, right, Scott? So, but I think there's definitely a couple of things that you've got to be aligned on for those bank fintech partnerships. And I think, you mentioned, risk tolerance and culture. There's no getting away from those having to be aligned, right? If you are operating, again, if you're operating in a high risk territory and your banking partner is culturally risk averse, it's a non-starter.
Right.
You're not going to get anywhere. So, the business TransferMate operates in certainly is the embedded payments business. So I know if you're using an accounts payable or business spend management system, you're likely to already be an established business. You're probably already spending, you know, uh, certainly five figures, in some cases six figures annually to utilize these platforms. So you're an established business. I know that you're using these tools. That all lends itself to a lower risk profile. It's not a business that's coming on and applying online and you don't know necessarily who they are. You don't have the context of the payments that they're making because we're plugged into these accounts payable and payroll and education and ecom platforms. I know exactly the invoice this payment is related to. I know exactly all the e-commerce transactions that led to, this amount being lodged into the account. So I've got the context of the payment, which makes it very low risk. And that's really important, we've found, for our banking partnerships, because otherwise they go, well, you know what, we want to make sure that, this isn't opening up, our risk appetite in any way, because banks have all the committees, tend to have more committees, certainly, and more people than fintechs would have. And I do remember when we started, we're the only non-US fintech to partner with Wells Fargo out of the US for that global invoice connect solution to allow Wells Fargo's customers to collect all around the globe much more easily than they would otherwise do. So they had a solution in place for their domestic invoice presentment. They didn't have one for cross border. So the next, like when I talk about value, there was a kind of an obvious gap. You guys
Right.
don't have any existing solution for cross border and global invoice presentment and collection. You do have a domestic one. Hey, wouldn't you like to be able to expand that across the globe? Um, and then, establishing that the risk profile is the same still doesn't mean you got to get away from all those signatures. As the only non-US fintech, we went through over 200 wet signatures, and I can't tell you how many committees that we went through. But that's also, I think, kind of as it should be, right?
Yeah.
Because if you get a misalignment there, that partnership just ends up, dead in the water. And so, we went from there. It's the engagement with, once you get over the approvals, obviously it's a how do you engage with the sales teams, with the product teams, and with the politics of any organization. So again, uh, is the solution that you're bringing, and this is where you get into the politics, is it going to cannibalize any existing revenue that there might be some other faction of a bank that are worried about? So thus, okay, we're doing cross border. Is this going to cannibalize any revenue from the FX teams? And uh, again, we went for the approach that we're doing global collections. So again, the example that there's a Wells Fargo customer that's sending, invoices for farm machinery to Gary's farm in Ireland. Um, if I traditionally, let's say that Gary gets an invoice for US dollars for that farm machinery, I go into my bank in Ireland, in Bank of Ireland, say, and I make an international wire transfer. It's Bank of Ireland that are capturing that FX, right?
Right.
So in this case, you could consider what we're doing for the account to account world, kind of like dynamic currency conversion in the card world. Like when you walk into a hotel and it says, oh, hey, you got a US card here. Do you want to pay in US dollars? And by the way, never ever do that,
Yeah.
because, it's typically you're looking at like 4%. So we were also very transparent, that, hey, we can give a better deal. We allow you to set the rates across the portfolio. We allow you to set the rates per customer. This is a better deal for your customer's customer, and a fully reconciled solution for your customers. And yeah, we gain a chunk of the FX in this component. So there's a brand new revenue stream here. Not only are your customers getting a better process, but actually there's a brand new revenue stream that otherwise you wouldn't get. And the only one that is, losing in this equation is some other bank that you don't know at the other side of that
It's
transaction.
not in the
So
loop anyway. Right. Yeah.
exactly. So, it's kind of pick the things that are reconciled and aligned from a risk perspective, work through the politics, make sure there's not going to be some faction in your partner that is going to go, hey, this is disadvantaging me, or this is, I'm not able to recognize that revenue in any way, so why would I do this? Make sure you've got all that aligned, and then, it's the actual engagement, and you need FaceTime, you need people on the ground. We work in a bunch of different partnership models. Some of them we stand side by side, and some of them we embed our people within, a partner sales organization. And finally, from a compliance perspective, again, there's a bunch of different models, but because we're a licensed entity, what we found works with our banking partners is that we actually onboard the end customer as well. So we're standing off our own license, and that was kind of an important consideration, that in this particular scenario, not to say it doesn't always work, you know, um, the banks were looking for a regulated technology provider that can provide the solution. Again, in my previous world, in card acceptance gateway, that was a non-regulated business. So it was really all about the technology. So it depends on the context of the project, but you know, fintech and bank collaborations are no different from any other collaborations. Are you delivering value? Are you culturally and risk profile aligned? And then how do you navigate the internal politics and make a success of it and make sure that that success is able to be recognized through revenue recognition, revenue sharing, and other, commercially advantageous tools.
Yeah, I think the other thing you said in there was just the recognition of the constraints and the kind of operating environment, if you will, right? Like the fact that there for certain entities in certain scenarios there will be expectations of things that you're doing that are just table stakes. It's just non-negotiable, like the regulated entity piece of it, right? Or certain licenses that you have, or certain certifications that you have. I think a lot of times we found that fintechs, especially ones earlier in their journey, they'll overlook some of those things and not realize that, hey, you can't even get to the conversation if you don't have these particular certifications or these particular things in place, and from an operational or security or whatever it may be
Mm.
perspective. So
And
I think
globally,
that's an
right?
important piece as well. Yeah.
Globally, you don't know what you don't know, right? So, we've always had an eye on not only our licenses, but certification. So early in our journey, we went and got ISO 27001 certified. Um, but the same pieces around collaboration that I'm talking about are not only true for bank fintech partnerships, but also for that embedded payments with those software platforms. So, I'll give the example of when we started a partnership with Coupa and powering Coupa Pay account to account payments. So again, important that we were the regulated entity. This is a new revenue stream that we're able to share with our partner, but we're doing the heavy lifting from a regulatory and license money mover perspective. But to your point, Scott, one of the things that we didn't realize is, a lot of these are large US listed companies. And so actually, yeah, the ISO 27001 is great, but we're also going to need you guys to be Sarbanes-Oxley 2, SOC 2 compliant.
Right.
So we had to go down that journey and get SOC 2 certified as well. Um, and different territories will have different requirements that you'll have to be able to, be a little bit flexible with. The trick with global payments is to try and simplify and abstract the complexity while not completely ignoring, any market nuances or differences that are out there. So you're always going to have that element of flexibility. And one of the ones that typically comes up with us is always is single sign-on, right? Where we are providing an interface. So the majority of our business is via our API, but where we do provide an interface, a user interface there, typically, we find a lot of the partners going, "Hey, we're going to need that to be SSO'd in with our organization," and you, you'll always have within a product organization some elements that are going to be, custom for a partner too. And is the squeeze worth the juice? Is what
Yeah.
everyone's got to ask themselves.
SOC 2 is my favorite one because as a guy who spent my whole career in financial services, that's the first thing that comes to mind when it doesn't matter how small you are. If you're planning to work with those types of customers, especially with banks, I just know that's something you have to have in place. And the earlier you start, the better off you are. But it catches so many fintechs off guard because it's just not on their radar of a thing they think matters. And then they get into these enterprise conversations, and it's immediately like, oh, wait, you don't have your SOC. It's like, oh, okay, well, now you got to
Yeah,
spend the next 6 months like going and getting that in place because it's not, it's not easy by design. So um,
yeah.
one of the other things in this is interoperability, right? In the especially as a global company working with companies all over the world, how does that play into whether you how you think about product or how you think about partnerships? But what role does that play in your thinking?
Yeah, I mean, interoperability is an interesting one, right? So again, when we look particularly at like, bank um, integrations into TransferMate, we expose, what I think a lot of developers would recognize as a best in class API, bidirectional API and webhooks. That's a JSON RESTful API, key value pairs, and we can you can do that from a transactional perspective, but also from an onboarding perspective. So you can get FX quotes, you can activate virtual accounts in real time, and get webhooks back in terms of money landing into virtual accounts or payment status updates. Um, but that is a proprietary API, right? So that is, we've made it absolutely as simple as possible. But additionally, when dealing with a lot of FIs, go, well, actually, we want this all to be ISO 20022. And so again, the ability to ingest and to send ISO 20022 messages, and then, you know, again, you're typically looking at fix for the FX part, and then for the settlement part, you're looking at those ISO messages. So you've got to be able to send and receive what would be industry standard messages. So I kind of think that's relatively important. But to be honest, most of our integrations that we have with our software partners are all using TransferMate's API. So it tends to be B2B software platform uses TransferMate's API, and TransferMate in the background are using ISO with the banks for the sending and receiving of payments. So it can be a mix and match of those proprietary interfaces and those more industry standard interfaces. And then also from an interoperability perspective, there's an interesting one from the cross-border piece, right? So when you look at, in particular, the ASEAN market in Southeast Asia, so there's the ASEAN payment connectivity, so connecting up, Singapore's Fast to, Thailand Prompt Pay to India UPI. There's a lot of these cross-border initiatives where you just need, your code or your mobile number, and then you can send an instant payment across these borders. The way I kind of views those that it's kind of hard to build out that bilateral infrastructure where each payment scheme operator has to agree with another payment scheme operator how they're going to interoperate and to join those up. The purpose of a business like TransferMate is to actually, hey, we are one hub. So, we can send or receive into TransferMate and where the funds flow, and then we can, you know, send out the other leg of the payment locally. So you don't have to have those payment schemes create all these bilateral agreements. Actually, we can be that bridge. So from an interoperability perspective, you could say that the space that we play in, cross-border payables and receivables, we are attempting to be that interoperability bridge and then exposing it as simply as possible, via our tech stack and suite. So, you
Yeah,
want to
so
send.
arguably you benefit from the lack of interoperability in some cases, right? By being that layer that can create that connection point between systems or networks that aren't interoperable.
Exactly. So, we try and be that hub, and, you're trying to make the world a smaller place just in recognition that it's a never ending job for any of the schemes to tie up. And some of them won't even want to tie up, and there's not a political will to tie up. If you take the example of US RTP, and the restriction, you've got to have both legs, of a payment being US, a US originator to a US receiver. Some of those payment rails, are closed off from a cross-border perspective. Um, we again try and just make it easy. So where there is no operability, or there's nuances like, oh, you're going to have to use this rail if it's a cross-border payment. You can't use that rail because it's not allowed. We allow our customers to say, do you want to make an ACH? Do you want to make an instant? Do you want to make a high-value wire? Do you want to make a cross-border? Or do you just go, look, hey, I tell you what, I don't know. This is your job. You just execute it as best you can. So that's like also something that they can just leave up to us. And we go, hey, this is the best rail. We'll go and do it. So not only provide the interoperability, but provide the simplicity and abstract the complexity. So, and that's kind of that's kind of the trick because we're payments guys, but all of our customers aren't payments guys. They just want it to work. It's a utility, turn like water. Turn the tap on, it works, right? The water
Yeah,
comes out.
that's the value add, right? The
Mm,
not only connecting into things, but also the logic around what makes sense of when
yeah,
to what rail to use when and all that for sure.
exactly.
Yeah, two things to kind of close out the
Hmm.
conversation. One is the last thing I'm going to ask you is just about where you see some of this going, and whether it's for TransferMate specifically or just more broadly as an industry. But before I go there, I wanted to throw in a question around something that's been really kind of hot topic for at least me as a payments nerd in the news, and that's agentic commerce. You talked earlier about just the experience and the ability to kind of simplify some of these experience and in the context of partnerships or an
Yeah.
ecosystem, how it takes different players working together. I'm just curious about how you see that space, right? The idea of agents, AI agents acting on behalf of the user in some capacity to complete a purchase or to complete a money transfer. Um, what do you think about that space? Is that a reality you want to see happen? Is that a threat in some way to what you guys do? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think agentic AI certainly huge, huge topic. Agentic commerce and executing the payments is kind of more interesting. So, everyone has look, it's all AI and stablecoin. I'm just recently back from Money 2020 in Europe, and again, it was all about stablecoin there. So you think is AI is yesterday's news, but AI ain't going anywhere, right? And in fact, what you'll see some of the regulators, and here in Ireland and the UK, you'll see them opening up regulatory sandboxes with the use of AI, and Nvidia getting involved in that as well. So that's kind of super exciting. Um, within TransferMate, we have some agentic AI projects that we're doing. We're already using AI in particular from a data perspective, but we're using agentic AI now from our compliance and onboarding perspective to be able to really accelerate, particularly as we grow in APAC and the numbers that are there, to be able to scale that business. But at the end of the day, that's about preparing a pack, having it all ready, but we still have a human at the end review that because you're technically not allowed to have the AI agent make the decision at the end of it.
Right.
And that's probably going to be the challenge with the AI and agentic commerce as well, is if you've got a hallucination or if you've got any incorrect data there, if you've gone ahead and executed a payment transaction, but actually you didn't check that the FX rate was 500 basis points, not 50 basis points, or whatever, there was some sort of an error in it. Uh, if you've executed the payment and you've executed the contract, you've executed a contract that you didn't want to execute. So I think it depends on the value of the transaction, depends on the velocity, and like everything, it's just going to depend on the dollar amount that you're exposed to within that. People will dip their toes and start doing it in low risk and low value environments. And that's where I can definitely see the value because having a human involved where there's a low value transaction that's going to take someone's time, then actually, how economically viable is that as a business? If you can get AI to do that for you, where it's both low risk and low value, but high touch, that's the AI sweet spot. So yeah, we've got so I'm very excited about our agentic AI launch from an onboarding perspective. We've got our first release coming out in June. So and we're putting a lot of effort into that. So I'm really excited to see where that will go. And then the industry is from a broad perspective. And shout out to my cuz Patricia Scanlon, who is the AI ambassador for Ireland as well. So she's always one to I'll chew the ear off her in terms of just trying to get advice and where things are, and she's always a super sounding board and a great person in general. Yeah.
Anything in particular in your future or in the space you see that you're really excited about?
Yeah, I mean, look, Money 2020 was all about um, stablecoin, and I think everyone's going to have a strategy for AI and stablecoin. Um, I think when you look back at crypto, and it used to be, if you go back to 2014 and Stripe doing Bitcoin acceptance, and it took too long for that transaction to actually get confirmed within the blockchain. But stablecoin's a little bit different, and digital tokenization as well. So there's some super exciting things that are happening there. You can see, and BVNK had a good few announcements, in 2020 around both stablecoin acceptance and stablecoin payout. So I think the ability to add that. So if you have what you might call the traditional, but really the fiat world coupled with the stablecoin world, what you've got is interoperability, exactly what we were talking about. So if I can move easily my US dollars, convert into a dollar peg stable coin, be that USDT, USDC, or whatever, and deliver that anywhere in the globe, 24/7. Um, that combination of fiat and stable coin is going to be very exciting, and we're going to see a lot of innovation, and it'll reduce a lot of friction for players globally. Um, and then the other thing from a tokenization perspective, where you do see a lot of the what you consider traditional banks doing super things there. So Dave Cunningham in Citi doing the and leading the project for Citi's digital token services, and so that allows customers like TransferMate, who are FIs, to deliver liquidity anywhere in the globe using their tokenized services when otherwise the markets would be closed.
Right.
So instead of having pools of liquidity all over the globe, you've got one central pool. So effectively a cash concentration product, and then use City tokenized services to be able to deliver that where it's needed, when it's needed. Um, so yeah, I think there's going to be a lot more in tokenization and in stablecoin in particular, and we're kind of excited about what's to come with that combination of fiat and stablecoin, the crypto world.
Awesome. Couldn't agree more. And it's like you picked it from the headlines. I think that's what a lot of us are excited about right now. So continue to see how that space evolve and your role in it. So, all right, Gary, what I think that's going to be it for today. I appreciate your time. Appreciate all the insight that you provided, certainly about the company, but also just about the evolution of the space. So thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Scott.
Absolutely.
And
And
thanks to
thank
all
you
the
all.
listeners as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching. If you like what you saw, then please subscribe. Look for the payments report down in the show notes, and we will talk to you next time.
Thanks, guys.